Hey there. You're listening to True Story No Cap. Real stories, no exaggeration, no lies. Just the raw, unfiltered moments life throws our way. Relax, lean back, and let's get started. Dee, is this serious? Anastasia fixed her gaze on her friend, leaning across the table in a cozy cafe. I suppose there's reason to raise our glasses, Diana smiled slyly, gracefully lifting a wineglass filled with the amber, noble drink. The evening before, she had invited Anastasia for lunch. Her friend, known for her passion for gossip and hunting for other people's stories, responded without the slightest delay. And, it must be admitted, there really was a reason for the meeting. Deanna coquettishly tossed back her black, shiny hair, showing off new earrings sparkling in her ears. "Oh, I think I can already guess what this is about," Anastasia drawled knowingly. "A new admirer, and judging by appearances, a very wealthy one." "Your perceptiveness knows no bounds," Diana parried. The waiter silently placed their ordered dishes before the ladies and gave them a slight smile. "Come on, tell me quickly. I'm dying of curiosity," Anastasia pleaded as soon as the waiter's figure disappeared from view. Diana chuckled softly. It was her favorite pastime, to torment her friend by dispensing information in meager portions. For Anastasia, a true magpie, such tactics felt like sophisticated mockery. "He's in the restaurant business. He's rich, handsome, generous, gallant, and drives the latest model Lexus," Diana spilled, as if from a horn of plenty. Anastasia feigned fainting, slumping dramatically in her chair. Then she suddenly perked up, casting an admiring glance at her friend. "Wow, what a catch. And how long have you two been together?" She eagerly prepared to absorb every word. "About a week. And we met, you won't believe it, in a flower boutique," Diana sipped from her glass. "I went in there to choose greenery for an upcoming order and came out with a bouquet of white roses for myself." "That's just mind-blowing." Anastasia couldn't stop gushing. "At least show me a picture of this oligarch." Diana reached for her handbag for her phone. A few deft movements, and soon the friends were leaning over the screen, studying a photograph of the man. "The suit fits perfectly," Anastasia concluded authoritatively. "You can tell right away, not from Aunt Carol at the local hair salon. Well built. He's not just a man, he's a dream. That's all there is to it." Anastasia sighed enviously, propping her cheek on her hand. She hadn't had anyone herself for 6 months, and her last suitor didn't possess such a set of virtues by a long shot. Suddenly, a spark of some long-forgotten thought flickered in her eyes. Anastasia straightened up and, tilting her head perceptively, looked at Diana. "But we both know there's always some flaw, even the smallest one, right?" The girls had learned long ago, no matter how perfect a man seemed at first glance, he would inevitably have a drawback. It was an unwritten rule. The handsome biker turned out to be a notorious womanizer, the successful businessman a heavy drinker, the charismatic boss a bore and a miser. The rule held true without fail. "There's a flaw," Diana admitted with a slight sigh. "He's married." "Oh, pfft," Anastasia waved her hand dismissively. "That's absolutely nothing." The friends giggled softly, and the light clinking of glasses echoed through the cafe. "Wives have never been an obstacle for us," Diana nodded in agreement. "Especially his wife." "Ugh." The girl grimaced dramatically, showing complete disdain for her presumably unknown rival. "No manicure, no styling, sits at home, gotten fat. In a word, some kind of frump." "Even so," the gossip friend was amazed. "Let's look her up." Diana ran a finger with a bright red, shiny nail across her smartphone screen, and soon a photograph of a woman appeared before the two girls' eyes, clearly past 40, with a simple haircut and an ordinary business suit and blouse. "Is she a teacher or an accountant?" Anastasia giggled. "Seriously, such a handsome man is married to this mistake? Are you sure?" "Absolutely. And it's for the best." Diana blew the bangs out of her eyes. "Look at me and at her and at me. Even a fool can see who a normal guy would want to spend time with." Anastasia looked her friend over with a critical, appraising gaze. "It's not even interesting to steal a husband from someone like that," Diana yawned. "She seems to be about 7 years older than him, too. He probably married her as a gray mouse for appearances, and she's happy to sit at home and forgive him everything. I know these frumps well. They're ready to wait as long as he comes home to sleep, right? Anastasia drawled, finishing her wine. But you're planning to make sure he doesn't even come home to sleep in the end? How will the poor gray mouse survive that? The gossips burst out laughing together. His fingers felt the smooth leather surface of the steering wheel pleasantly. A special, expensive scent hung in the cabin, and even though the car formally belonged to his wife, it was only registered as such in the vehicle passport and insurance. The ladies weren't going to rummage through the glove compartment studying documents, were they? The mere fact of George being behind the wheel of a prestigious foreign car was quite enough for them. The phone trilled. George glanced at the screen. Sarah was calling. He pressed the button on the steering wheel and his wife's voice came through the speakers. George, today is the 50th birthday of our cook Helen Peterson at the restaurant on Kromskaya. Please buy a bouquet and congratulate her from both of us, Sarah said quickly and clearly. All right, he replied curtly and hung up. George didn't love his wife, was openly embarrassed by her, and tried to avoid appearing in public together, except for the most intimate family gatherings. He treated Sarah like a long-standing, reliable, but completely unattractive acquaintance. Sarah was older, preferred clothes in calm tones, comfortable and made of natural fabrics, wore modest makeup, and never dyed her hair. However, she possessed a sharp mind and by the age of 30 had managed to build a successful business. They met when 20-year-old George, who had just arrived from the provinces, came to apply for an administrator position at her recently opened gleaming new restaurant. Even then, he realized that by attaching himself to Sarah, he could set up his life quite well, which he did with brilliant success, rising from the network's executive director to the husband of its owner. But after a few years, nature took its course. George was lucky. Nature had generously endowed him with the best a man could have in terms of appearance: broad shoulders, a strong chin, tall stature, a dazzling smile. Next to his inconspicuous drab wife, he began to wither, and then decided he shouldn't deny himself the company of young, long-legged, appetizing beauties. These whims changed from time to time, and George didn't feel serious emotions for anyone. He carefully hid his escapades from his wife and skillfully used her work, money, and position. George didn't care at all what anyone thought about it. The main thing was that his wife remained calm. 7 years passed like this. A flower shop appeared up the street. Deciding not to put off the errand, George turned on his signal and pulled into the nearest parking lot. He figured a simple bouquet of 30 carnations would be quite sufficient for the cook. The shop door jingled softly against those very Asian hangings that make pleasant tinkling sounds when they strike each other. Inside, besides the florist, there was another customer. She was meticulously examining expensive orchids and large white roses, and George was looking at the girl with much greater interest, for a few moments even forgetting why he had come in at all. He was jolted from his reverie by the florist's voice. "Young man, can I help you with something?" "Ah, yes. I need a bouquet for a jubilee. 50 years old, for a woman." George quickly collected himself, not taking his eyes off the attractive customer. "Relative? Mother?" the florist clarified. "No, a colleague." "Nothing fancy, a formal congratulation," George answered dryly and nodded towards the lilac chrysanthemums. For some reason, the florist sighed and began wrapping the flowers. A slender, petite brunette, long hair, blue eyes. Too good to miss. He would regret it later. George pictured a pleasant scene for a moment and warmth spread through his chest. "These are the best roses, the white angel variety," he said, stopping behind the girl. "They are only given to loved ones." The stranger turned around and her gaze swept over George's business suit and the car keys in his hand. This always worked. In the modern world, so many women crave male beauty and success that those who possess them are given the sweetest choice. "Do you know about flowers?" the girl asked, coquettishly adjusting her hair. "I know who they should be given to," George smiled dazzlingly. "Oh?" the girl raised an eyebrow. "And what flowers would you give me?" George realized he had met a girl with character. The thrill seized the man even more strongly. He smiled again and addressed the florist, who was just finishing wrapping the chrysanthemums. "Be so kind as to add 21 white roses from the ones the young lady was choosing." He readily took his wallet from the inside pocket of his jacket. Under the stranger's astonished gaze, they left together, carrying, among other things, the 30 carnations. An unexpected companion with a bouquet of white roses? "Do you give all girls such bouquets when you meet them?" she asked with a smile. No, the man put away his wallet. You are the first? The girl blushed, her cheeks flushing from the flattery. And I hope you won't refuse to have dinner with me tonight, George asked in advance. I won't refuse, she held out her hand. Diana? George kissed the extended palm, looking her straight in the eyes. George, Sauvignon Restaurant, 8 in the evening. I might be a little late. I suppose that's acceptable on a first date. George paused for a second as if considering. Until this evening, Diana. Until this evening, George. He walked to the car, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. All this time he watched the girl. The suit, the car, and the charm had worked flawlessly. George winked at himself in the rearview mirror and drove out of the parking lot. By evening, the young lady would be completely melting from her own fantasies and would agree to anything, though she was too beautiful to limit it to just one evening. It had been a long time since he had had a long-term affair. Who knew? Maybe the time had come. He had been wondering where to invite her, which restaurant. But then he changed his mind and chose the one that was just 2 streets away, so as not to complicate his trip. Diana, as she had warned, was 20 minutes late, but she appeared in a skirt with such a slit that George felt hot. Dinner quickly made it clear that they were both adults. I want to set things straight right away. George swirled the glass of whiskey in his hand. I'm married, but I don't love her. And anyway, it was done more formally. Diana looked at him intently, sipping her dry red wine. You know, I'm not ready to settle down at home and dive into domesticity yet either. She ran her finger along the stem of the glass. We both understand what we want from each other, don't we? And your wife doesn't bother me at all. George hadn't heard this often. Usually his paramours would start to regret, reproach, sometimes even throw tantrums with demands. He quickly sent such women packing. A toy is a toy precisely so it doesn't dictate to its owner, but accepts his rules. Dinner concluded at a hotel. Both got what they were looking for. George didn't stay the night, went home, promising to call in a couple of days. Left alone, she didn't regret what had happened at all. Moreover, she realized she had stumbled upon a big catch, and showing too much character now would be extremely disadvantageous. She needed to be a gentle kitten for a while, and then he would start staying overnight, and he would divorce his wife. Patience, Diana, patience, she whispered to herself, looking at the shadow from the nightlight. Handsome, smart, well off. He's worth fighting for. Sarah sank onto the sofa in the living room, exhausted. She had been on her feet since morning today, visiting suppliers, looking for an error in the accounting, conducting an interview with a new cook, ordering cutlery. When you own a chain of restaurants, there's almost no time for rest. Every day throws up new tasks. Sarah understood this when she plunged into the catering industry. However, she loved her work with all her heart. In her time, she had trained as a cook herself, then quickly completed personnel management courses, worked for almost 9 years in an elite restaurant, and knew the industry inside and out. And then, with the money from the sale of her grandmother's apartment, she opened her own business and in the same year met her future husband, George. The woman didn't hesitate for long. She accepted the proposal, as there was no time to be picky about suitors. She had spent the years that other girls spent on dates on building her business and working. George was handsome, and Sarah was flattered that he had chosen her. Soon, her husband proved that he also had a good business acumen, and Sarah made him the managing director of her network of establishments. Malicious tongues whispered that George was a gigolo, but the woman didn't believe it, or didn't want to believe it, or simply didn't have the time. Sarah's mind was amazingly capable of planning, distributing, evaluating, and forecasting everything related to her business. But when it came to the subtle science of love, the woman was completely illiterate. By some miracle, Sarah hadn't made her husband a co-owner of the network, enchanted by his charm. She glanced at the clock. It was just past 11. There was a rustle in the hallway. You're late today, too. Sarah came out into the corridor, greeting her husband. Yes, George nodded curtly, taking off his jacket. There were problems with the new uniforms for the waiters. I spent a long time sorting it out. Oh, that seamstress, Sarah sighed. She always lets us down. Tell me about it. George pecked her cheek briefly and went into the room to change. Did you have dinner? I brought something back from the mini banquet for Helen Peterson's Jubilee. 10 minutes later, they were sitting at the large table in the luxurious kitchen. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had cooked anything substantial here herself. Usually they had something quick for breakfast like coffee and waffles or scrambled eggs, ate lunch at work, and had dinner delivered. There were too many things to do to fit in a couple of hours of cooking. Although Sarah loved the culinary craft and had herself taught the head chef of her first restaurant how to properly braise meat and how to turn any tomatoes into Baku-style ones. An experienced observer would immediately notice how George's peacock tail dimmed next to Sarah, how he suppressed with effort everything that flourished so luxuriantly with his numerous mistresses. His gaze became gray, his movements quick but constrained, his smile politely strained. At first, George tried to assert himself next to his wife, but quickly realized that she was not capable of giving him what other girls did. He chose a different tactic: rarely appear at home, give token gifts once a month, be polite, and never argue. "Maybe we could watch one episode of that series," Sarah suggested. "Sarah, I'd love to, but I'm dead on my feet. My eyes are already closing. I drove home purely on autopilot." George brushed her off and simultaneously yawned dramatically, rubbing his eyelids. The woman sighed. She knew they had both been on their feet all day, but she hoped for a miracle. After all, a woman's soul unconsciously craved romance, to snuggle up next to her beloved husband, cover themselves with a blanket, and fall asleep watching a favorite movie. George rinsed his plate and went into the shower. When Sarah reached the bedroom, he was already asleep. The woman lay down next to him and hugged her husband. The pillow quickly carried her into the realm of dreams as well. "Mr. George Miller, someone is asking for you in the hall." A guest, the waitress Daisy, looked into the small office where George was sorting through the restaurant's paperwork. "Is something wrong?" The man looked up from his laptop. "No, nothing. She said she's an acquaintance of yours." Daisy was somehow flustered. Very softly and subtly, but George noticed. He always felt how women trembled if he graced them with his attention, especially young provincial girls. George subconsciously evaluated all female employees who came for interviews, and again, subconsciously, only hired those he found attractive. George liked Daisy. Her work was pleasant to watch. "I'll come down now," the restaurant's executive director replied after a pause. George straightened his jacket and went into the hall. At a table for two by the window, Diana settled into a chair with the grace of a panther. She smiled radiantly at him and rose slightly in greeting. The man was pleasantly surprised and sat opposite her. "How are you?" Diana sipped her coffee with an innocent smile. "What are you doing here?" "I missed you," the girl replied, batting her eyelashes even more innocently. "From the photos on your account, it was easy to figure out exactly which restaurant you manage. So, here I am." George was moderately impressed and was now quite openly admiring his mistress. Diana definitely knew how to present herself to her best advantage. Today she had come in tight trousers, heels, and a bright-fitted white blouse that accentuated her long dark hair. "Daisy, bring the guest tiramisu on the house," George ordered, passing by the waitress. "Mr. George Miller, you are so generous," Daisy purred, insinuatingly and simultaneously. George was unconsciously filled with pride. Anyone who says only women like compliments is lying. It works both ways. "I thought I should invite you somewhere myself today," the girl continued, scooping foam from her coffee with a spoon. "Go on." George placed his palm on the table. "Tonight there's a performance of Woe from Wit at the theater. I think a cultural evening wouldn't hurt after yesterday's fire." Diana smiled with the corner of her lips and raised an eyebrow expressively. "Only, I'm afraid I don't have a suitable outfit for such a place. You?" He had been considering calling his mistress by the evening himself, and here was such initiative as if she had read his mind. And George liked proactive, beautiful girls. This smoothed over the fact that he was being asked for a gift. The man smiled back mysteriously at Diana, took out his smartphone, made a couple of movements, and the sound of a bank notification about ticket purchase rang out. "I've taken care of the tickets." He put the device away in his inside pocket. "And you take care of the outfit." Diana leaned across the table and pecked George on the cheek. "And now I must excuse myself. Work awaits." George stood up from the chair. "Until this evening, and enjoy your leisure, as we say." He winked at Diana goodbye and left. She waited until her lover disappeared and quickly glanced at her smartphone screen, nodding to herself in satisfaction. Diana began to taste the dessert piece by piece. At the same time, she held the phone to her ear. Were you doubting me? These trousers work wonders. Uh-huh. We're going to the theater today. Of course, Anastasia whispered. She's just passing through. Listening to guests' conversations was part of Daisy's daily routine. A month passed. If at first George only allowed himself to see his mistress during breaks and on his days off, soon she consumed all his space and sank deep inside, to a place where the man usually didn't let girls for entertainment. Diana changed, adapting to his mood, but in any form she was invariably beautiful. She said what he wanted to hear, admired him, and this further fueled his interest. Next to her, he was bright, charismatic, generous, gallant. Next to Sarah, he was uniform, calm, homogeneous, blandly simple, with a businesslike expression on his face. They went to museums, exhibitions, various events together, even went to a country retreat once and went shopping. Looks like someone's in love. Anastasia sprawled on the sofa in Diana's tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. And that someone isn't me, her friend chuckled. Is it great with him? It would be great with anyone if they have money and looks. You, as usual, don't talk much about yourself. Don't invite me home. Anastasia pulled a candy from a vase on the shelf. I tell him what's necessary for now. I'm a wedding organizer. I love Mediterranean cuisine, European culture, and quality clothes. He doesn't need to know about the rented apartment and my past affairs. Diana swung her leg, sitting on a chair nearby. The goal is to steal him from his wife, and then we can talk about other things. See, Diana, you know how to charm men. Anastasia stretched. My ideal match is over there in the flower shop. Believe me, maybe yours is waiting for you in the sausage section of the grocery store? Anastasia laughed. The girl remained silent. All right, go on. As usual, Anastasia shrugged, chewing another candy. Let him take you on vacation or buy you an expensive ring. Vacation is a bit too soon, Diana shook her head. A little later, when he's ready. Reel him in, darling. If you drag your feet like this, he'll never be ready. Anastasia rose from the sofa and put her hands on her hips. You need to state your position. Let's at least get those shoes, remember? That works. Diana looked slyly at her friend. Get ready, let's go try on the shoes. That's the spirit. Anastasia gave her a thumbs up and started looking for her handbag nearby. Sarah was reviewing documents sitting in the car next to her husband. They had been driving around the city on errands together since morning. Traffic jams, calls, urgency. Sarah could handle all this calmly, experience had taught her. But George didn't like such hustle and bustle and was nervous, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. And he also complained about the increase in purchase prices over the last month. Meat has soared, especially beef. What have they come up with, raising prices in the middle of summer? Cows have plenty of food growing, George grumbled. Vaccinations, grain, fuel, electricity, Sarah listed calmly, without even looking up from her papers. If one thing grows, another grows. For now, we're managing, and we'll keep the prices on dishes. Guests are used to our conditions. We'll raise them if there's another 20 or 30% markup on meat. But we'll earn less, George objected. We'll observe for now, the woman replied. George didn't give up. Seafood has also gone up. Everything is getting more expensive. Maybe we shouldn't buy a new freezer rather than keeping prices the same? We need the freezer, George, Sarah countered. The old one broke down twice, and the cook's preparations spoiled to a considerable sum. George was calculating where else he could find a flaw and how to cover his expenses. In reality, meat and seafood were indeed getting more expensive, but not as much as he had described. George understood that the beautiful mistress was costing him more and more, but he couldn't help himself. He wanted to be with her, to spoil her. George's phone pinged, notifying the owner of a message in the messenger. For some reason, Sarah's eyes flicked to the device. A notification hung on the screen. Photo. George took his smartphone and quickly looked at the received message as quickly as he could, and with as calm a face as he could muster. But Sarah still noticed his eyebrow twitch and how a shot of women's high-heeled shoes flashed in the screen's reflection on the glass. An unpleasant, unfamiliar, but very understandable feeling scraped inside her. With an effort of will, Sarah suppressed it, but the cold snake of suspicion had already slithered further down her back, sending freezing needles through her. Something important? The woman asked her husband as if casually. Someone's sending jokes in the work chat, George replied, watching the traffic light carefully at the turn. Sarah nodded somewhat distractedly. Missed it. They arrived at the restaurant to sort out work issues. Sarah was bombarded with questions from the cooks. George immediately escaped to the terrace to call someone. You're sending me photos at a bit of a bad time? He tried to make his voice sound confident, as if scolding playfully. I thought your wife didn't poke her nose into your phone, Diana remarked softly into the receiver. Stung by this softness, George quickly composed himself. No, my space belongs to me, but there are moments when awkward situations happen. He leaned against the railing. Do you want to buy these shoes? They match my new handbag so well, Diana drawled. It would be a huge oversight not to get them. Besides, I'll look even brighter next to you in them. George swallowed, already picturing the shoes on his mistress's slender legs. Beauty, female magic were doing their work. All right, I'll be waiting for you in them tomorrow. Without hanging up, George went into his online banking and sent the required amount to Diana's card. Is that enough? Yes, of course, thank you, kitten, the girl purred into the receiver. Pleasure cost money, and whose money paid for these whims was a secondary matter. Sarah also went out onto the terrace, exhausted by the staff's questions. Her head was buzzing with the abundance of information, but outwardly the businesswoman remained as calm as ever. George, I think we've been working so much lately. She approached her husband. Let's go out somewhere? Sarah, I'd love to, you know, but I've already promised to go out of town with the guys. Chris bought a new car, wants to celebrate. George shrugged nonchalantly. I know you don't like his company, so I didn't even invite you. Sarah sighed. The excuse was perfect. She really didn't care for Chris, her husband's friend. Well, if you're busy, she smiled tightly. I hope you all have a good time. George smiled widely, put his arm around her waist, and together they went inside the restaurant. Dinners and breakfasts with her mother were a pleasant tradition for Sarah. They had started long ago, and over the years had evolved from scrambled eggs and cocoa in the home kitchen to full-fledged outings to the most beautiful and interesting establishments. In essence, it was her mother who had instilled in Sarah a love for the catering industry and played a significant role in who her daughter became. This time, Sarah chose an Italian bistro with small cozy tables and checkered tablecloths for dinner. They often changed locations, but Sarah never invited her mother to her own restaurants, considering it something of a bad omen. By the appointed time, her mother still hadn't arrived. Sarah was looking out for a Mini Cooper but couldn't find it. Her mother, despite her age of 64, was a lively, energetic, and peculiar lady who had retained a youthful devil-may-care attitude. 10 minutes later, the waiter placed a teapot and cups in front of Sarah and set the table. The phone rang. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I won't be able to make it. Her mother's voice was filled with apologetic notes. The neighbor's dog got sick. She took her to the vet urgently and asked me to sit with her granddaughter. You wouldn't leave a small child unsupervised, would you? I'm sorry, dear, again. Well, if that's the case, there's nothing to be done, Sarah sighed. Call George, let him fill in for me, her mother suggested on the other end. I'll call, the woman agreed curtly. Wish Buttons Mrs. Thompson good health. Bye, Mom. Sarah hung up. She wasn't exactly upset, but something close to it. It's like when you go to the store for one thing and end up buying something completely different or nothing at all. Originally, the evening was supposed to be spent with her husband, then her mother, and in the end, she was sitting alone at a table waiting. The waiter placed a dish with pizza on the table and wished the guest a pleasant meal. It was too late to leave or refuse. Sarah decided to enjoy her own company looking out the window. Who would have thought that being a successful businesswoman and a married woman, one could feel so lonely? Good evening. Excuse me for bothering you, but you look very much like my childhood friend, a voice suddenly said nearby. Sarah turned around and saw a vaguely familiar man talking to her. And you look very much like my childhood friend, Sarah laughed, recognizing the guest. He raised his eyebrows, but then smiled too. Sarah, I haven't mistaken you, have I? May I sit down? Of course, Mark. Wow, the man commented. How long has it been since we last saw each other? 20 years? More, since you were transferred to serve in the Far East, Sarah clarified. And now I'm a retired policeman. Mark folded his hands on the table. And I decided to move closer to my historical homeland. How are you? So many years have passed. Amazing. And so began conversations and questions, discussions and laughter. Sarah grew up in the same courtyard as Mark. He was 2 years older than her. All their childhood, they climbed into other people's yards together, built huts, baked potatoes in the ashes, and dreamed of growing up quickly. At school, Sarah studied diligently, while Mark got into scrapes, grew up, and by her graduation, he had joined the army. Their bond was strong, and you couldn't offend Sarah, not in the first grade, nor in the 10th. Otherwise, Mark would quickly send the bullies' noses flying. I studied there in Vladivostok, went to work in the police, became an investigator. I've seen so much during that time. Now I've come here and I'm thinking about what a brave pensioner like me should do. Mark finished his story cheerfully. It was written on your forehead that you'd wear a uniform. I'm not even surprised. Sarah's mood noticeably improved. Meeting an old friend became that pleasant event, a spark of joy that was so needed. And in that case, you should either bake pies or make others bake them, Mark replied in the same tone. Admit it, you're in charge of someone, aren't you? Only over 3 head chefs, 24 waiters, and a modest restaurant. Sarah stirred her tea with a spoon. Wow, Mark was genuinely amazed. So we both became what we wanted? Looks like it, Sarah agreed. What happened? Mark noticed her distant gaze. Are you upset about something? Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to complain about her empty suspicions, but the feeling of the icy snake hadn't left her since that moment in the car. In the end, the woman, choosing her words carefully, described the subject of her concern to her friend. Mark furrowed his brow. An idea lit up his face. How about I keep an eye on your husband? I'm retired anyway, plenty of time, and I'll get to know the city properly at the same time, he suggested completely casually. That feels wrong somehow, Sarah looked at the man doubtfully. What if he realizes he's being followed? Mark smiled widely. Have you forgotten who I am? Surveillance and data collection were my professional duties for many years, and I must say, I performed them flawlessly. Mark, you're growling, Sarah said in a dry voice, and then burst out laughing, inadvertently cheering Mark up. It will be done, comrade investigator. Can I just finish my dinner? She took the last slice of pizza from the dish. They chatted for a long time, ordered a second pot of tea and then dessert. The planned dinner turned out to be anything but planned. By the end of summer, Diana had grown accustomed to a comfortable and well-provided life alongside George. Like many girls from the provinces, she had come to the capital to study, but along the way she realized she had chosen the wrong profession. So, according to her diploma, Diana was a bank employee, but in reality she was involved in designing premises for various celebrations, mostly weddings. This activity brought the girl not only good dividends, but also useful contacts. Diana quickly began to see relationships as a way to get ahead and get rich. She disdainfully threw tales of love in paradise in a hut into her mental trash can. Who needed that love when money had long decided everything in the city? And she saw confirmation of this at the weddings she designed, where girls married wealthy, established, and educated men. Exceptions, of course, occurred, but they were rare. Diana believed that love would inevitably appear if your husband had a good income and respect, and his appearance played almost a secondary role here. But no matter how much her brain tried to convince her, the craving for beauty broke through from deep within. Why did Diana latch onto George? She had hit the jackpot she had always secretly hoped for. Neither his wife nor other aggravating circumstances bothered her. Take everything you can, the girl said. Like-minded people quickly appeared for such a position. At one of the weddings, Diana met Anastasia, one of the bridesmaids. Diana liked the sharp-tongued, cheerful gossip, and soon they started spending time together. Anastasia had also come from the provinces and dreamed of getting set up well at someone else's expense. True, so far her setup was limited to working in a mid-range boutique and living with her aunt. Over time, the girl tidied herself up. But while Diana had managed to quickly root out her provincial nature, Anastasia hadn't succeeded, and it would occasionally show in her manners and conversation. This was precisely why only men who picked up on this stuck to her, equally provincial hoodlums or conquerors of the capital living in dormitories. Anastasia would get angry. Diana would laugh. She herself was luckier. As in any fishing, big fish take the bait less often than those who want to be like them. At 25, Diana already had experience with a government official, a bathhouse complex owner, a successful photographer, and a titled athlete. But none of these relationships had led to the coveted trap on her finger. The official was also married. The businessman for some reason said he would marry the girl his parents approved of. But Diana wasn't discouraged. During the relationship, she managed to extract everything useful for the future. "Time to hint to your George about a joint vacation," Anastasia drawled, yawning. "Now is the velvet season, the most suitable time for trips to the sea." Agreed, Diana nodded. "I was thinking about it myself." "What's there to think about? You're already covered in gifts." Anastasia gestured dramatically towards her. "He gave you earrings, bought you shoes, ordered a dress. You've already been to all the decent establishments. What are you waiting for? Throw Sarah overboard." They sat on an elegant bench in the shade of sprawling trees on the embankment. It was stuffy. Diana fanned herself with a promotional booklet she had hastily grabbed from a promoter. Anastasia wanted to advise more and better. Lately, she eagerly hung on Diana's every word about her relationship with George, egging her on. "I demand the Maldives straight away." "Do you think so?" Diana suppressed a note of doubt in her question. "Of course, friend. You've been seeing each other for 2 months now. With his possibilities, he could have figured it out himself by now. Yet he drives a Lexus, but the thought of taking his lady on vacation hasn't crossed his mind." Anastasia tapped her forehead with a bent finger. "Maybe you should enlighten him." "Maybe you're right," Diana drawled. "I'm tired of it here. I want a change of scenery to warm my bones, get a tan without a solarium, and my branded swimsuit is just lying around." A friend wouldn't give bad advice. Diana immediately gave in. She suggested to George that they go on vacation together, 7 to 10 days. She needed to come up with an excuse that he could present to his wife without pain, and she also needed to figure out where to scrape up the extra money for this vacation. It was one thing to be away from home in the evening or give his mistress earrings, and another to slip away for a week's vacation costing a couple of $100,000. Inside George, two voices were fighting. One, adventurous, urged him to spit on everything and give Diana the trip, and the second, meticulous, calculated the risks. "If you divorced, you'd be taking girls around the world, not sitting under anyone's thumb," the first thought complained. "Right, divorced and left with nothing. You should have told her long ago to put something in your name," the second one sneered. Ideally, George wanted to chase 2 rabbits at once, live comfortably without much effort, and see a beautiful mistress while having a wife. But as the years passed, the position of the second role began to weigh on George. Although few people knew about it, their formal, dry relationship with his wife would have been obvious to anyone. "Divorcing George is not an option," he muttered. "But no one else needs to know that." Right. But the vacation adventure will have to be canceled and smoothed over with something else." The man also remembered that in September, the restaurant he was responsible for had a lot of work and banquets planned. Flying away at such a moment was maximally risky. Sarah might suspect something, but George didn't want to quarrel with Diana either. "We'll find a compromise." George looked at his reflection in the glass door and smirked. Beneficial for its initiator, of course. Sarah strolled leisurely through the restaurant hall, observing the fruit of her labor. The woman watched over it with tenderness and care, like a growing child who brought home certificates, A's, and medals from school. Sarah was distracted from her pleasant contemplation by a phone call. "Hello, Sarah. I have the full report ready." Mark's voice was as casual as ever, but at the same time trying to hide something. "Hello, Mark." Sarah's heart began to pound loudly under her shirt. "Do you want to discuss this now?" "I think so," Mark sighed somewhat stiffly. "The information is curious, if that's the word. I'm parked nearby on the corner of the street." "Okay, I'll come over now." Sarah hung up. An unpleasant tightness squeezed her chest, and a cold sweat broke out on her back. Why had she agreed to this adventure at all, knowing what might surface? Perhaps she didn't want to believe it, or she was afraid. It was ridiculous, given her position. Sarah composed herself, clenched her hands into fists, exhaled, and pushed the door open to the street. She found Mark in his car. He was thoughtfully studying something on his smartphone screen. When Sarah got into the passenger seat, the man placed the device face down on his knee. "I won't keep you in suspense," Mark began without ceremony. "I didn't observe George constantly, only for a month, but what I managed to see and record was enough." Sarah swallowed. Mark picked up his smartphone and handed it to her, having first turned on the screen. The photo that appeared showed George sitting in the Bohemia Cafe with a young brunette, not in a friendly way at all, whispering something in her ear. At the Bohemia Cafe, Mark prompted. Sarah raised her hand, ran an icy finger across the screen. In the next shot, George was kissing the same girl in his car. The photo was taken through the windshield, but the professional hand of the former policeman had captured the shot so well that there was no doubt who was in it. There were several more photos after that, but they all eloquently spoke of the same thing. "So, a mistress," Sarah stated in a harsh, unfamiliar voice. "Here it is, the truth I refuse to believe." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Mark encouraged her, running a hand over her shoulder. "I tried to remain impartial in such moments, but I can't. You're not just another person with a statement." "Who is she? Did you find out?" Of course. Mark opened a folder on his smartphone with other photos and began scrolling through them for Sarah. Himself. Diana Reed, 25 years old, from out of town, works as a wedding decorator, and also a professional charmer of wealthy men in the capital. Sarah carefully examined the photo of her rival, slender, long-haired, blue eyes, stylish clothes, her complete opposite, and quite young. "And how long has this been going on?" Sarah asked, gathering her strength again. "According to my observations, a little over 2 months," Mark drawled. "The motive here is more than clear. She needs a rich man. Mark hesitated, carefully searching for words. "You don't have to be delicate," Sarah finished the sentence. "He needs someone younger and prettier. I've long realized somewhere deep down that such a handsome man as George couldn't be with me out of great love. I'm not a fool either, and I understand what attracted him initially. Only I didn't stop loving him because of it. And I should have." The woman's lips trembled, her eyes stung, and the pain was felt through all the walls. Sarah wiped away the tears that welled up with the back of her hand, sniffing. Mark involuntarily began to comfort her. "Sarah, your husband is a poser and almost a gigolo. Don't you dare blame yourself for anything. Besides, that's not all I found out." "What?" Sarah stared at him in astonishment. "What do you mean, not all?" Just like that, Mark somehow conspiratorially furrowed his brows. It seems both lovers are playing their own game and think no one suspects anything. Essentially, that's true. Only I burst out laughing when I realized what was what. Sarah gazed at him, bewildered. Instead of explaining, Mark showed her something else on his smartphone. Sarah carefully examined the shot. "I don't understand anything. He has 2 of them?" She furrowed her brow. "I didn't get it at first either," Mark nodded. "It seems your husband wants to have his cake and eat it too." Mark leaned towards her and began explaining something, counting on his fingers and drawing diagrams. And Sarah laughed. Absurdly, foolishly, and completely inappropriately, but she laughed. "And what should I do in this situation?" she asked the former investigator after all the discussions. "Act as usual, calmly," Mark said. "Let everything take its course, and I'll continue gathering information so you can wrap everything up nicely in the end. I hope, by the way, you're not thinking of forgiving him?" "Absolutely not," Sarah shook her head categorically. "I've finally faced my fear, and now I don't intend to depend on it. This is my life. I'll send you all the photos, but just don't start a showdown prematurely. He's a jerk, I understand, but we need to see this through. You won't lose anything legally in a divorce, right? And he'll get almost nothing. So let's at least nail him for the triumph of justice." He hugged Sarah amicably and gently shook her. She composed herself, smiled, thanked her friend for his work, and got out of the car. "Why aren't we flying?" Diana wrinkled her nose petulantly. George sat opposite her in a soft armchair on the terrace of a trendy bistro. Boats and ships sailed by on the river nearby, and the wind blew cool air off the water's surface. "Understand? I just can't drop everything and fly away in September." George showed her the list of restaurant hall bookings for a month ahead. "I can't now, but I promise we'll revisit this issue in the future." I was already set on the sea and sun. Diana continued to pout out of principle, although she perfectly understood the real reason for her lover's refusal to travel. His wife, and only his wife, was preventing them from enjoying their vacation and each other. He could say anything about being busy, about plans, but for the first time, her lover's wife genuinely annoyed Diana. Gifts and time were no longer enough for her. She wanted to be the sole owner. Anastasia kept egging her on like that. On another, darling, you can only dream of a comfortable and well-provided life, her friend said. You need to free up your comfortable seat sooner. I brought you something to brighten this situation. George reached into his pocket. He placed a beautiful box on the table and nodded invitingly, suggesting she open it. Diana took the gift with interest and found a ring with a large, transparent stone in the box. Oh, is this an engagement ring? She examined the jewelry, which sparkled in the sunlight. Let's say so. George contemplated the girl's joy and delight at the gift. He liked this feeling. He was nourished by it. So, you're proposing to me? She put the ring on the ring finger of her right hand. Let's say, George smiled mysteriously, folding his hands over his stomach. But you're married for now. Diana looked at him insinuatingly. I know, and I promise I'll resolve this, George replied evasively yet confidently. It seemed this answer satisfied Diana completely, as she kept admiring the stone in the ring and had already sent several photos to her friend in the chat. Well, of course it would be foolish not to boast about such a gift. George understood that he couldn't postpone the moment forever. Divorce from Sarah would be disadvantageous for him in every sense, so sooner or later the affair with Diana had to come to an end, unless she eventually swallowed the fact of his marriage. Diana pressed gently, but often, and George understood why. Many of their plans were ruined because of Sarah. Anyone would start to get irritated. That same evening, Diana was walking home from her workout, a sports bag slung over her shoulder. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Anastasia kept praising the ring and raving about George's impeccable taste. Did he tell you clearly he'd divorce? She asked. Almost, Diana confirmed. Almost, friend, doesn't count, Anastasia remarked. It's either a clear answer or he's leading you on further. No dates, no plan of action. What is this? Are you suggesting you brainwash him with this question every time you meet? Anastasia bent down to tie her shoelaces. I suggest you go yourself to his drab little wife and put a definitive end to their family story, Anastasia stated clearly. Otherwise, it will be like with that politician. Let your George get angry, but you need to nip it in the bud. So, cut it off? Diana snorted doubtfully. She had never done that, but she had played out similar scenarios in her mind many times. Yes, of course, cut it off, Anastasia confirmed heatedly. There's no other way here. Can we go together? No, he's my man. And who do I have to fear there, Anna? Diana remembered George's plain legal wife. An old gray mouse? Please. A couple of phrases will be enough to make her cry. I still don't understand what keeps them together at all. Beautiful people should be with equally beautiful people. It's high time, friend, Anastasia supported her, to go and demand what's yours from the one who clearly got him by mistake. Having concluded these loud speeches with mutual laughter, the girls said goodbye at Diana's doorstep. She quickly slipped into the shower in a combative mood and at the same time figuring out what to wear to her lover's wife's place to further emphasize the difference between them. The doorbell caught Sarah after lunch. That day, she had decided to work from home and had been sitting at her laptop in the kitchen since morning. George had left to prepare for a large banquet and wasn't expected back yet. Her mother hadn't warned her about a visit, and she wasn't expecting a courier either. Sarah put down her laptop and straightened up. Her back only ached when she put on her comfortable trousers and t-shirt from her loungewear set. The woman took a sip of the now cold tea on the go and headed towards the door. Through the peephole, standing and persistently pressing the doorbell, was her husband's mistress. Sarah even blinked, not believing her own eyes. Her mouth went dry. The woman looked carefully through the peephole again. Yes, that was it. Standing on the landing was the very girl from the photos Mark had provided her. Sarah took a deep breath, then exhaled and reached for the handle. A wild, childish thought flashed through her mind. Maybe pretend no one's home? But the woman quickly chased it away. The latch rattled with a metallic sound. The door opened, their gazes met. In those couple of seconds, an experienced observer would have read contempt, disdain, and disgust in the eyes of one, and vague interest, incomprehension, and strange restraint in the eyes of the other. Hello, Sarah. I won't beat around the bush and will tell you straight away. Diana looked Sarah over with a gaze full of contempt. Your husband and I love each other, that's a fact. And he doesn't love you. And that's also a fact. So let him go amicably and give him a divorce. Sarah overcame the initial wave of uncertainty and leaned her shoulder against the doorframe. She examined her rival. Diana had come in full makeup and dress, clearly wanting to contrast, emphasizing her youth and vibrancy, as if Sarah hadn't attended management courses. In her mind, the image of the mistress changed to that of a puffed-up green chorus girl who had come to apply for a job. The substitution worked. "Hello, Diana. I will agree with the second fact, as I have recently become aware of it, but I would strongly dispute the first. My husband is only capable of loving himself," Sarah said in a calm voice, looking Diana directly in the eyes. Surprise flickered in Diana's eyes. The gray mousewife turned out not to be the one who was supposed to back down immediately in front of her, and she even knew her name from somewhere. "You're still not a match for him. And we both understand that." Diana put her mask of confidence back on. "He's young, handsome, successful. He should be with a woman just like him, who will make him happy, give him a divorce." The moment for the flick on the nose that Mark had mentioned had arrived. "And who said I wouldn't give it?" she said, looking intently at her rival, who was clearly thrown off balance by this. "Take George right now if you like. I'm even willing to let you into the apartment to pack his suitcases." Sarah stepped back and beckoned invitingly into the hallway. Diana hesitated, something clicked in her head. "Just keep in mind that you won't get anything. The restaurant business is mine. This apartment was bought by me before the marriage. And even the car that dear George used to pull the wool over your eyes also belongs to me. No, if the love is so great, I dare not stand in the way. As they say, with your loved one, paradise is in a hut," Sarah shrugged. "So be it. I'll let him keep his job as a waiter." Diana was dumbfounded. The carefully planned scheme in her head collapsed like a house of cards. She recoiled. "Oh yes, I almost forgot." Sarah took out her smartphone and showed Diana a photograph. The picture showed a familiar car and all too familiar people. George was kissing Anastasia near her own house. Diana was stunned, stared at Sarah with a wild look, and began frantically pressing the elevator button. It was like a grasshopper trapped in a glass jar in the midday sun. All her confidence, mannerisms, and feline grace instantly vanished the moment Diana realized what an idiotic position she was in. Finally, the elevator doors opened and the girl disappeared into it. Sarah watched her go with triumph. Now she didn't have to pretend anymore. She could cast off the beautiful and ungrateful toy. Let someone else have such happiness, and she, Sarah, didn't need it for free. Only in the taxi did Diana fully realize how cleverly she had been tricked. One had carefully blinded her with someone else's wealth. The other had talked her ear off and pushed her in the direction she herself wanted. Inside, she was seething. Even the taxi seemed too slow. She arrived at Anastasia's house. She didn't know why she had come here, what she wanted to see or find out. Diana looked around. The painfully familiar car. The girl deliberately didn't ring the intercom and slipped into the building with one of the neighbors. She went up to the third floor and again, like an hour ago, began pressing the doorbell. A couple of minutes later, the door opened. Anastasia, disheveled in a housecoat, stood on the threshold. "Where is he?" Diana shoved her aside and entered the apartment without ceremony, still wearing her shoes. "Are you drunk? Who?" Anastasia twirled a finger at her temple. Instead of answering, Diana stared at her wildly and began to throw a tantrum. "Did you decide to make a clown out of me?" Diana reached the old-fashioned tall wardrobe in the room and threw open the doors. That very quiet, tickling pause occurred. In the depths of the room, among the hangers of clothes, holding his shoes and trousers, stood George, gazing at the two former friends with the look of a Chinese bobblehead. "You traitor!" Diana grabbed his ear and pulled him into the room. George yelped, stumbled awkwardly, then stood up, covering his face from the blows his disgraced mistress rained down on him. The situation was worthy of a joke. A bad joke. Diana stared furiously first at her former suitor and then at her former friend. "How? Why did you do this to me?" "And why do you always get everything?" Anastasia flared up suddenly and brightly. "All the perks, all the handsome guys, all the best options. And I'm just like a little dog picking up scraps in the form of stories about your gifts and affairs. Learn to share, friend." Diana was speechless. The one she had trusted with all her secrets, all her ideas and mysteries, turned out to be a vile rat. "And now I understand everything." Diana, cheeks burning, slowly clapped her hands. You deliberately persuaded me to raise my demands, hoping George would think twice and dump such an expensive girl. And I, like an idiot, believed it out of a sense of my own importance. And you sent me to his wife so I would make a fool of myself, and then you would come in and take over." "Sarcastic," Anastasia remarked. "Maybe I'm not that beautiful. But I know how to be a real person, not just wear expensive shoes and beg for another ring. Listen to problems, give advice. And you're like a plastic doll, soulless and dolled up." Diana felt almost physically as if she had been spat on. Not fully understanding what she was doing, she lunged at Anastasia and delivered a resounding slap. The echo spread even into the corners of the room. Anastasia's head rang like an empty pot. Amidst the noise of the quarrel, the rivals didn't even notice how the hero and instigator of the whole mess quietly slipped out of the apartment through the unlocked door. Without a word, they rushed to the window and only managed to see the rear bumper of the familiar Lexus. At home, George quickly tidied himself up and took a change of suit from the hanger in his study so that nothing would remind him of the shameful position George had found himself in today. The adventurism and danger that were invariably present in the situation he had created stirred George. Anastasia wrote to George on social media and suggested meeting. Diana had shown her his profile so often that it was easy to remember and find the man later. Anastasia didn't ask to be taken to expensive restaurants, didn't ask for gifts, but she truly knew how to listen. The more Diana demanded, the more George liked Anastasia. And at some point he decided, why choose one when you can be with everyone at once? One for money, the second for cozy evenings, the third for going out and maintaining his status. Why not live like that? George was driving home hoping to rest from the situation he had gotten into, but today wasn't over yet. "Sarah, I finished early," the man said loudly, slamming the front door. "Are you home?" "Home, George, home," the woman replied. "I'm so tired." He walked into the room, rubbing his forehead deliberately. Tired of the agonizing choice of which of the two mistresses to prefer. Sarah looked at her husband sitting in the armchair. George looked as if he'd been doused with ice water. He tried to say something, but only incoherent sounds came out. "I know what you're tired of." Sarah stood up and threw a stack of photos at his feet, where he was alternately with Diana and Anastasia. George stared blankly at the photos scattered across the parquet floor. "Did you think you were the smartest one?" Sarah walked right up to her husband. "And the proverb about the well is apparently unknown to you." George just looked at her in silence, gradually realizing how deeply he had stepped in it. "Out of the apartment by tomorrow, please." Sarah turned away to the window. "And by the way, I've already found a new manager. If the position of waiter suits you, you can stay. And if not, you can go wherever you please. I don't need a traitor husband, a cheat, and a gigolo." "Sarah, let's talk," George began, but his wife interrupted him. "Get out now. Just leave the car keys here. Otherwise, I'll report it stolen." George realized he had overplayed his hand and outsmarted himself. The box of plenty turned out to be a trap he shouldn't have trifled with. Devastated, humiliated by his own bad habits, George shuffled off to pack. Excuses were useless. He thought about staying with one of his mistresses, but realized Diana wouldn't forgive him, and Anastasia hadn't really needed him much anyway. More likely, she just wanted to spite her friend that way. George felt used and worthless. Sarah heard him leave the living room. She felt she had won. But most importantly, she admitted to herself what she had feared and diligently ignored. It was as if a dirty curtain had been pulled back in her consciousness, and pure, bright light poured in. The first snow fell on the city like a thin veil, covering pavements, roofs, trees, settling on fluffy coats and red noses, hiding in bushes or landing on the tongues of curious children. Sarah hurried to meet him. They hadn't seen Mark since September. He had then rushed off to his older sister near Murom while she was recovering from a broken leg. And now this morning her old friend had written to her and suggested meeting. Sarah was brushing up on her driving skills. Although she knew how to drive, she preferred to take taxis or rely on her ex-husband's driving skills, and now the woman was determined to steer her own life. Mark chose some inconspicuous little cafe for their meeting. A plump woman in an old bonnet was frying juicy chebreks behind the cashier in the open kitchen. "This place reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen." Sarah looked around inside with interest when she and Mark met and started talking. "That's why I chose it," the former investigator smiled, following her gaze. "Like in childhood, it's very atmospheric. I want something simple, understandable, warm, comforting, and hot. A cheburek? Let's do it, Sarah nodded in agreement. 10 minutes later, they were both tucking into hot chebureks. They steamed, juice spurted out, but no one was bothered by it. Sarah got her hands all greasy and couldn't remember the last time she had felt so light and good with someone. Even the directors of a restaurant chain are allowed a little indulgence in the form of simple tea and good old chebureks. My sister's place near Murrum has forests like something out of a fairy tale. Perfect for cross-country skiing on a winter morning, Mark wiped his hands with a napkin. I remember you used to love running like that as a kid. There was more snow when we were kids and frosts were more frequent, Sarah remarked. But you're right, I'd love to escape here for a day and go to the forest. So, you're ready to go? Mark asked again warmly. I think the restaurants will manage without my supervision for a couple of days, Sarah stretched. And I need to practice driving not just in the city, but on the highway too. Skills are only developed through practice. We can go today. Why waste time, right? Mark winked at her. Mark, Sarah chewed her lip, formulating her thought correctly. Will this be a friendly trip based on warm memories or a romantic getaway hoping for something more? Mark smiled with the corners of his lips, and wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. That's for you to decide, the man replied. Let it be the second, she said after a pause. Mark's hand covered her fingers on the table, tenderly, confidently, and with that, Sarah thought that another chapter was beginning in her life, but in a new book,